What is up, guys? Welcome to the Meaning Of Podcast, a podcast where we talk about your favorite directors and the deeper meaning within their films. I am Andres.
This is RB3.
I'm Sabrina.
And coming on to the show is former singles champion, Mr. Paul Oyama.
How's it hanging? You're outnumbered. It's three to one swag in this call, so we're taking over.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I guess I should just join.
Yeah, you got to come over.
Breaking news right now, guys. Joining swag.
Let Twitter know.
Paul, thank you so much for joining us, man. First of all, I have to ask, how is quarantine life treating you?
It's pretty good. I mean, to be honest, as most people who know me know, most of my time is just watching movies and listening to music anyway. So it's not really too different. But yeah, I've had more time to sort of sit back and go through, little binges of different directors and films and stuff. So it's actually been kind of nice in a way. Obviously it's not ideal, but I think I've made the most of it for the most part. Yeah, it's not bad.
I briefly talked to you before my Schmodown and your Schmodown too. I think we had matches the same day. And I got to know you a little bit, and I was like, man, this guy's great. And obviously he has a lot of knowledge. So I would love to have him on. So when RB3 mentioned that, I actually thought of you. I told RB3, I was like, I said Paul Oyama, not you. I beat you to the punch, even though he told me beforehand. But you gave us a list of directors that we can get into. And Sabrina went crazy when you mentioned Luca Guadagnino. So we're doing Luca Guadagnino, guys. This is an Italian director, obviously known for Call Me By Your Name. He did another version of Suspiria as well, and we'll get into that. But this is a guy who, when you think of artistic films, when you think of that typical European style of directing, you think of Luca Guadagnino, and I feel like that's the brand he's kind of been delivering nowadays. How did you get into this director, Paul?
Well, my first introduction was Call Me By Your Name. I remember I saw there was a screen grab that came out of Armie Hammer. It's them when they find the sculpture, and that was the first announcing of this is a big movie to pay attention to for 2017 award season. So I was really excited for that when it came out. I didn't really know what to make of it. I saw that in the theater. Then I went back and saw A Bigger Splash. Later on, saw Suspiria in the theater, and then recently visited I Am Love. And then in film school, I actually watched The Protagonists, which I didn't realize was by him until afterwards, looking back on it now. I don't remember a ton about it, but it's a pretty interesting sort of docudrama. It's like a film within a film kind of thing. But he's a super interesting director to me, and I think it's cool that he's a kind of director that gets American attention. He's kind of got a different style than I think a lot of people that most audiences are really familiar with, even in terms of like the award season contenders.
Yeah, absolutely. Sabrina, what is your introduction?
Yeah, so mine was definitely Call Me By Your Name. Beforehand, and I'll get into a little bit more once we're talking about Call Me By Your Name, but I read the book, fell in love with it, and I think the way he translated that novel to screen, it is just something that I haven't really seen before. I never really say that movies are better than the books, but I think this is exactly on par. This is what we needed from a film like this. So the second he amazed me with that, I was ready to see anything else he had to do. So just super impressed.
RB3, you have a similar story?
Yeah. Basically, Call Me By Your Name was kind of my introduction to his filmography too. And when Suspiria came out, I was obviously a huge fan of the original Suspiria. I've talked about that a lot on this podcast before. So this was kind of, I had to watch that just out of sheer curiosity of who he was, like, as how he was going to make this adaptation, and what it speaks to his ability as a filmmaker and what his deeper themes are, because I think you learn a lot about a filmmaker based on their interpretation of classic movies as well. Obviously, Paul and I both were film school kids. So there's always like that kind of, when like a foreign Italian, especially when it's like an entire Italian director, you kind of look a little deeper and kind of appreciate what they're doing a little more, because it's so unique to like the American style. His style always fascinated me with like the very like natural, very like realistic, very kind of, like very authentic, and like without like a lot of, over stylization. Is very subtle and is very character focused and actor focused. So that's something that's always grabbed me about his filmography too.
It's incredible, right? Because I feel like Call Me By Your Name really grabbed the American attention towards this director and really showed audiences a different style. But at the same time, it showed us based on the performances, right? Because I feel like that's the biggest standout of Call Me By Your Name, at least in my opinion, is Timothy Chalamet, Armie Hammer, and literally every actor in that movie just gives an incredible performance. And this kind of gave that Timothy Chalamet heartthrob that it is now, where he's kind of this like everyone's favorite white boy, as we said it, I think a couple of weeks ago, before it was someone else. RB3, who's the guy from Hunters?
Logan Lerman.
Logan Lerman. Now replaced by Timothy Chalamet. I think that's part of it, and also obviously Armie Hammer. People love that guy, but it also showed us a love story, right? A love story that we don't really get a lot of, especially when it's between two dudes, and it showed us a different style. Call Me By Your Name literally swept, just financially, Oscar-wise, it did really well. Music-wise, like we were talking about the music before we went on because it has a lot of attention. So I feel like that's the right place to start. And I know we usually start in chronological order, but I feel like Call Me By Your Name is a good place to start. Let's dive right into it. Paul, I mean, thematically, what is your biggest takeaway from this film? Let's talk big picture.
Well, I think it's interesting because it's such a flashbulb moment for kind of everyone involved. Armie Hammer, after post-Social Network, had sort of gone into this lull where he was doing the Lone Ranger and like a lot of roles that were not really on people's radar. And this is sort of his like big prestige project to get him back in the consciousness. And it's kind of the birth of Timothy Chalamet as like a movie star. He's been in good films before this, like he's young Casey Affleck in Interstellar. He's great in a little film called Miss Stevens that I highly recommend everyone check out. But this is sort of his breakout performance, and I think that those two obviously are the center of the story, and that's such like an incredible performances by both of them, especially Chalamet. I kind of like think it's one of the most remarkable performances of like the last decade or so, just because something that I'll get into now and a little bit later is also I think that Luca is so good at the physicality of his actors, and I think that Elio's performance, you see the scenes where say he's like on his bed and he's all festered up, and you could just see this boundless energy that he has, but he's forcing it into himself. And he's grounding himself. And I think that what Lucas films are about are really about the unsaid, the thing that people want to do or want to say, but they feel like they can't for whatever reason, and they're afraid to. And that the whole film is really a struggle of these two people. They both know they want the same thing. They both know it probably won't last. And they don't know if they want to go ahead with it and go ahead and risk themselves. And Michael Stuhlbarg has the great speech to wrap it up at the end, but I think it's so much about what we want, but we don't think we can really have. And I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, obviously beforehand, when I came on the live stream with you guys, I was playing Mystery of Love, Sabrina, and you came at me and you were like, don't show me that heartbreak. Is that your biggest takeaway, Sabrina? It's heartbreak?
No, I really do believe it's a beautiful celebration of love. I feel like a lot of the characters grow so much throughout this entire film, especially Timothy Chalamet's character. And as I said before, I read Call Me By Your Name prior, and I absolutely fell in love with the book. I truly cannot see anybody else doing that story, like servicing it the same way that Luca has, because exactly what you were saying, where it's like the unspoken, the unsaid, and there's just so much within body language and their like eyes and everything. It all tells a story within itself that is so present in the book. And again, he translates that so beautifully to screen. It's a stunning slow burn romance. I love seeing all that kind of stuff. It's such a beautiful depiction of like first love, young love, that type of thing with Timothy Chalamet's character. His direction is enthralling. I feel like I couldn't look away at all for like, I just wanted to be like eyes on the screen. I was like, don't blink. Like this is like a painting. It's so stunning. Again, the cinematography is beautiful, and I could genuinely take certain frames and just hang them up on my wall and call that art, because it truly is. And again, Timothy Chalamet and Armie Hammer's their performances are great, but their chemistry is what like really stands out to me, because I even read just recently that Shia LaBeouf was supposed to play Oliver. Oh, I don't know if you guys saw that.
No.
And I can't picture anything else besides Armie Hammer and Timothy Chalamet doing that. It really is interesting. And again, like Paul said, Michael Stuhlbarg's monologue at the end of the film, that gets me every single time. They have that in the book, and I reread it all the time. I have it like marked, and yeah, Sufjan Stevens, Mystery of Love. He he has those 3 songs. He has Mystery of Love, Feudal Devices, which is a remix of a song he had already originally put out, and then Visions of Gideon at the end. I think it already, when this was announced and they came out with the stills and they're like, oh, Sufjan Stevens, 3 songs in the film, I was like, sign me up. This movie was one of my favorites of the last decade. I talked about it when we created our list, and I love it to pieces. I've revisited so much. Seeing it in theaters was a whole experience. I'm so lucky that I was able to do that.
Yeah, RB3, any big takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, to me, what was so powerful about Call Me by Your Name is that it's a film about a gay relationship, an LGBTQ relationship, but it doesn't have like some sort of overwhelming institutional conflict or some overwhelming kind of like, greater sort of conflict. The conflict is really in between the characters themselves. It's really all about, it's really just all about romance. It's all about love. And it's treated the same way that any straight romantic relationship movie will be treating this kind of style and execution too. So like with that, I'm super glad that it has such a big impact. I love the representation of just like unabashed love that you kind of see on screen. I love the, when you look at the style of the film and, especially when you look at the screenwriter, James Ivory, and how Luca Guadagnino kind of took influence from James Ivory's filmography as he was a director and kind of figured out ways to incorporate his style into this. And it gives it like a really poetic, sort of slow, but really natural and romantic and familiar type of feeling that you would get with these kind of like lovey sensations. So I really appreciate all of that it does, and it's a really great and really well made film. Like you guys said, like Armie Hammer, like you alluded to, Paul, like he had a run of trying to do like blockbuster films like The Lone Ranger, which I actually don't hate, besides the terrible casting of Johnny Depp, and then also Man from U.N.C.L.E., which again, he's actually good in these movies, but they're just bad. They're not what that's not what he's shaped for. Like he's actually a really soft, really tender actor who can really get into the vulnerable moments. And then when you look back, especially when you watch this movie and then you go back and watch The Social Network, you kind of do end up seeing a lot more vulnerabilities and a lot more kind of introspection that you see in the Winklevoss twins than you probably, because when you first watch The Social Network, it's like this ego masculinity type of character. But then when you go back and when you actually know who Armie Hammer is and what he's trying to do and how versatile and ranged as he is as a performer, he actually gives a lot more to those characters than you would think. So yeah, overall, just incredible cast, incredible performances. Like you said, Michael Stuhlbarg. I don't even think he was nominated for the Oscar that this movie, the year this movie came out.
Neither of them were. Yeah.
Then that's terrible. I mean, that was one of the greatest monologues of all time, I feel like. So yeah, it's a great film just all around.
I mean, you hit so many notes, RB3, so I'm trying to go through them in my brain. The first one, you're right about Armie Hammer in The Social Network. My God, I'm low-key team Winklevoss when I watch that movie now. I was like, am I rooting for the Winklevosses right now? I kind of am because of his performance. And even though they're kind of douchey, you're still like, well, they're kind of right. So that's one thing. The second thing you said about Michael Stuhlbarg, like, didn't he do Shape of Water this same year? Because I feel like he was incredible in Shape of Water.
And the Post.
Yeah, that was his year. Yeah. And he didn't get a lot of attention that I feel like he deserved because he's obviously a phenomenal actor. But I feel like the biggest takeaway, and that's what you said, RB3, is it still is that LGBT representation that we don't get a lot of in movies. And I feel like it gets a lot of attention, right? Because we've talked about The Handmaiden. We've talked about the French movie that came out. I'm so sorry.
Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Carol. Like there's several, right? But at the same time, I almost struggle, like you said, RB3, to put it in that category because I feel like it has the similar strategy of a much more European romantic vibe than it is necessarily categorized as LGBT film. But again, I don't want to get my hands too into that because I don't have a connection inside the LGBT community, so I don't know a lot about it. But at the same time, I feel like that's where we should start because a lot of attention is there between the two relationships. If you reverse this between a man and a woman, could it still work? If it works perfectly, and it probably will. But the idea of this just being a film between two people who happen to be fallen in love. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, Paul.
Well, I think there's a lot you can actually draw a line between the relationship here and the relationship in La La Land between Sebastian and Mia. As this sort of like, this is a moment in time, and these people are obviously important to each other, but ultimately, like, what they're looking for long term doesn't align. And I think it's more about the experience they have together and what they share and what that means to them in the grander scheme of life. It doesn't necessarily have to be just about that. But I mean, it's really nuanced because he also, you know, Elio has the relationship with Marzia, the French girl, and like clearly there was a lot of affection and sexual interest there. So I think it's like, it's a really sort of fluid film in terms of, it's not a straightforward, just this, you know, guy meets a guy and they fall in love. There's like a lot more sort of going on. And there's a, you know, the big push and pull. I don't think that it would be as interesting if it was a straight relationship, because a lot of it is about them knowing that like the world is not ready for them to be like this, especially.
That's true.
And that's what the struggle is between them. That's why it takes them so long to do anything. You know, it's very clear from the, you know, the volleyball scene that there is some sort of spark and interest there, but it takes so long to manifest. And I think it's because of the conditions, and because, you know, it's set in the 80s, and it's not a film set in 2019 or 2020, where it would be a lot different probably. And that's what gives it a lot more depth, I think.
Yeah, Sabrina.
Yeah, as a member of the LGBT community, I think it really portrays that kind of what we experience growing up when you kind of have like conflicted feelings and you don't really understand yourself yet. Elio is 17. He's very, very young. And I think Luca did such a beautiful job portraying all of that. We see between the two of them, especially, I know everybody jokes about the peach scene, and of course, because it's funny, like, you know, like it's a good scene. Armie Hammer coming in and the way he's reacting, but then how Timothée Chalamet is kind of like shameful because of everything he's feeling, and then the result of this is kind of like the culmination of everything, and him being very confused, things like that. So I really do just love the way they have that, because this isn't like, for an LGBT film, we get a lot of stuff like Boy Erased, things like that have so much outside conflict that kind of diminishes what they're experiencing as a character. And this one is focused solely on it. He has the blessing. He has the love from his family. There's no issues with anything like that. It's just between him and himself, and him and his relationship with Armie Hammer that he didn't expect. And that just flowed so naturally, flowed so beautifully. And it just sometimes you just fall into place with something like that. So that's like my biggest takeaway.
I want to stay with you, Sabrina. Do you feel like do you feel like that representation that you have between these two guys, do you appreciate that on a level not only of this is a major Hollywood film and an Oscar type film, but also on a personal level?
I definitely do. I was so entranced by the love that Elio and Oliver have when I first read the book, and then just the chemistry between the two actors, as we said, is so great, and it really does capture that. And I fall in love with their love. It is beautiful to be able to see something like that, and something that's so unapologetic about it. It's showing everything on screen. I mean, with this story in particular, they're living together for that period of time, and so they're kind of always there, and there's always that built up, as I said, slow burn sexual tension, especially added because of the slow burn, like added with the confusion that Elio was feeling, things like that. So it is, I really, really adore this. I appreciate this. The second I saw it in theaters, it was my favorite of the year easily. And I just love it so much. I talk about it all the time.
Yeah, I feel like there is something to be said, and I'll be the one to say it just because I'm saying it, but it's something to be said about the way we view relationships, especially LGBT relationships, where I feel like on a sociological level, America seems a little bit more okay with the idea of two women, but when it comes to two dudes, it's still a little bit tougher for people to get into it. But this movie unabashedly does it, like you said, Sabrina. Any thoughts on that, RB3?
Yeah, I think, you know, just the way that this movie presents itself, just as I'm going back to, again, the style of it, but the style is very traditionalist. It is very reminiscent of like the time period, like, you know, while we think of like the 80s cinema as largely like blockbusters and Spielberg movies, there's a whole genre of romantic movies, period pieces, and European film that was very romantic and was very minimal and very simplistic in this portrayal of love. and it invokes all of that without being like overly nostalgia driven or overly. It's literally, you know, you could take away, you could adjust like the time period, you could adjust everything about it, but at the heart of hearts, it is about love and the conflict that comes with love and the conflict that comes with expression and sexual exploration. These are all themes that we've, you know, seen a lot of, you know, early established filmmakers kind of established like early on in their careers, you know, especially like Alfonso Cuarón, you know, Alejandro Iñárritu. All of these directors have like these early films that explore sexuality, and so does Luca for a lot of his early films too. But this one in particular feels like a much more matured, much more aged kind of recollection of that. Like the kind of, you know, when we talk about nostalgia, we usually think of like time periods and costumes and all that, but this kind of takes a feeling of nostalgia from like a romantic, personal, sentimental perspective. And you feel that pulsate and vibrate throughout the entire film.
Yeah, obviously, before we move on from this film, because obviously it's probably his most important film, I want to talk about something that you mentioned, Sabrina, and it's that idea of like every frame can be hanged up, because the cinematography in this movie is a major standout. And I feel like part of that has to do with the European countryside beauty aspect of where it's set. Like setting is important, but I also feel like I have this theory, and obviously it's not just a theory, a lot of relationship people have talked about it, where setting and situation can kind of push people into romantic relationships. Like literally, if I'm in a European countryside, is what I'm saying. Like, bro, I'm gonna fall in love with a tree, man. I'm like, it really is.
That's
that
only
kind
you,
of,
though. That's only you.
Yeah, I know.
Earth Day passed already. You know what to say.
Yeah, I'm a tree hugging guy, man. But I feel like in general, I've been in situations personally, and I'll speak personally because I don't care, where I'm in a setting where I'm like, oh, like this is such an intimate setting and such a beautiful external beauty that you're witnessing, that it kind of goes inward and it goes towards the people around you. And I feel like a lot of that is obviously spoken through the cinematography and through the visuals. And Luca Guadagnino made it a point to focus on that beauty of the movie. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Paul.
Well, I think that to some extent it's a little different than what you're talking about, just because Elio has been to this place over and over and he's comfortable in the environment. You know, like he knows the lay of the land. So it's not like he's going somewhere and it becomes something else, because I think he's at home really in this countryside. So he's not necessarily on a vacation. But it is interesting that like Luca is such a sensualist as a filmmaker, as you'll see with his other films. But this is really the only one that's like heavily romantic. A lot of his other films are about, you know, the body and exploration of desires and the sexual id. But like this film is way more heartfelt and romantic, I think, than the rest of them. And I think that part of that is just because of the source material. But I think that James Ivory is a big part of that, just because it is so reminiscent of, I don't know if you guys have seen his film Room with a View. From the mid 80s, that Daniel Day-Lewis is in it. He directed it. But it's got a similar scene to that monologue, actually, where a young woman is talked to about what the nature of love and if she truly does love or care for this person and what she'll be willing to do if that's the case. So I think that those two working together create this kind of harmonious blend of the sensual and the romantic that sort of brings the whole thing to this fullness that otherwise it might come off as like too sexual or too romantic. I think it strikes the middle balance really well. And I think that's kind of one of the things that makes it really work.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think going off of that too, you know, when you look at when you look at a lot of the kind of hints and the visual presentation that like alludes to love is very intimate and very personal, in the sense of like somebody who is familiar, who is like kind of familiar with like the theme of like budding sexuality throughout his previous films. You see that communicated with like great restraint and like a good amount of restraint and subjectivity. And I think the subjectivity is even heightened because of how they shot the movie. Going back to the cinematography, they used, if I'm not mistaken, they used only 135 millimeter lens throughout the entire production of this movie. So it doesn't, it's, you know, as opposed to using like a longer lens, like a 50 millimeter or a 75, whatever, you have a lot more, you know, those give you a much more far away kind of close-up kind of thing, but this movie doesn't really have like a close-up kind of feel to it. Everything's kind of presented in like wide shots with like shallow depth of field, probably a lot of low f-stops that accounted for a lot of natural light. So like the way it was shot is very and when you shoot with like shorter lenses, like I said, subjectivity, it gives you more intimacy with the characters. It gives you a lot more personal, intimate kind of feeling with the character. So everything from the way this movie is shot to the way the movie is scored, going back to the music, gives it this really like intimate, personal, romantic feel. Every device that they could use in filmmaking that heightens the emotionality and intimacy is all incorporated into making this movie like one of the most beautiful movies like in a long time.
And that truly is what makes it special. Everything you guys said, kind of him towing that line where it's not like so heavily erotic, so heavily sensual. It's still completely heartfelt, and we feel that love, and it's a celebration of LGBT love rather than something like, for example, just something I didn't really love, which is blue is the warmest color. Yeah, exactly. And that's where if Luca kind of took it in that type of direction, I wouldn't enjoy it nearly as much as I do now. It's because it's the celebration of just love in general, and we're able to celebrate it along with them, go along with their like short, sweet, kind of doomed romance journey. From the start, they know it's not going to last. I know Paul mentioned that, and yeah, I really am a fan of doomed romances in general. Kind of, I've noticed that.
Yeah.
Talking about movies or just kidding.
Just life too. Guys, don't even get me started.
I've noticed it too, Sabrina.
That's a different show though. No, definitely. Because from the start, we know it's something like Eternal Sunshine as well. Those kind of stick with me more than anything else. And it is interesting. It's an interesting thing.
I think
you guys. Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, that's because I think he is a gay filmmaker himself. I think that like you see with this and with Celine Sciamma with Water Lilies or Portrait of a Lady on Fire, it's like that there is the perspective that they bring that allows for the three-dimensionality and doesn't leave it surface level, which I think is, it's hard to get into the interiority of something that you don't understand yourself. So I think that that's one of the biggest strengths of the movie is that it's made by someone who is probably in a situation very, very much like this. So I think that perspective allows it to have a fullness that it might not have otherwise.
Yeah. Absolutely. I always talk about perspective and how that changes a little bit. It's not necessarily that someone who doesn't have that exact same experience can't make a movie about it, but it does have a different edge to it. It has a different attitude towards it inside of film, and you can notice that. And I've talked about that a lot when it comes to obviously female directors and directors of color. But I want to get your guys' kind of final vibes, because I know he's got a lot of other features, obviously not too much other features, but I really want to get into them. Any final words, Sabrina?
Yeah, again, this story is just so beautiful, a beautiful celebration of love. It sticks with me from the cinematography, the dialogue, the pacing, the editing, and of course, Sufjan Stevens being on the soundtrack, and the beautiful score that accompanies the entire film is just, love it. Highly recommend it for anybody who hasn't seen it yet.
RB3.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. Like we talk about the themes and the messaging and everything that, this movie is communicating through its visuals, its auditory, the score aside, the sound design in this movie. Yeah, just from a technical perspective.
He loves sound design. Like that's something he focuses on a lot.
Yeah. I mean, just the silence and like that kind of, countryside kind of bliss with like we hear like the little crickets and the little insects and the bugs in the wind and the subtleties of the wind. And then the tension, the way the tension is heightened through like the breaking of eggs at the table or things like that. There's a lot of great sound design moments that play into it. Like we said, cinematography, beautifully shot, 35 millimeter lens that they use throughout. And to me, the one scene that stands out the most is when they're in the I guess it's like a little plaza or a little villa area, and it's like that long take as they're like walking around, through the to me that's absolutely beautiful and gorgeous. This is one of the most impressive movies in a long time, and it only won a couple of Oscars for screenplay, and I'm not sure if it won anything else, but I don't think so. But I think this is probably. We're going to look back on this movie and kind of remember it. I think it's going to live on in the minds of a lot of people. And I I always think about, in film school, like how when in film school they're going to start teaching movies and stuff like that. And they've already pretty much after this movie came out, I saw people taking whole classes based around or whole class assignments based around this movie. So I think it does have a long lasting effect. I think is going to be one for the history books.
Paul.
Yeah, just another couple quick things. I love the use of just piano in the entire movie. Those scenes where he's intentionally playing the songs a little different and he's trying to be a little clever. He's like, well, this is like if someone listened to Bach, but also interpreted in their own way. I love that repurposing of the instrument. And another little quick thing that I noticed this time is, if you look at them together, Oliver's kind of the hot and Elio's kind of the cold in terms of their personalities. And it's so interesting that when they first go to the lake, Oliver points out how cold the water is when he steps in, and it's almost him stepping into that world. And I love the symbolism of that. As much as we love Coco, I kind of wish that Mystery of Love would have won Best Original Song at the Oscars. But also, overall, it's just a movie that I think will always stick with me. I don't know if it will become a huge cultural force for the masses, but I think that for a lot of people, this is a highly personal film that they will continue to return to and get more things out of as the years go on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and obviously, Paul, you told us about his Desire trilogy, and obviously he has a Bigger Splash, and he also has I Am Love, I believe, beforehand as features, because I believe he only has 4 or 5 features. Is that correct?
I think there's 7, but 2 of them are basically like softcore pornography and are not really available super wide. So I would say there's like the 4 kind of major ones that I think like I Am Love, Bigger Splash, Call Me by Your Name, and Suspiria, and then his first film, The Protagonist, which is pretty interesting, hard to find, not really easy for anyone in the U.S. at least to get their hands on. I thought it was a pretty worthwhile and interesting, or sort of Truffaut-ish kind of movie about movies. But yeah, like he's sort of coined the term the Desire trilogy for I Am Love, A Bigger Splash, and Call Me by Your Name, because there's a lot of thematic similarity, I guess, between the 3 of those things.
Yeah, talk to me about A Bigger Splash, man. You said there was a connection towards it in Call Me by Your Name.
Yeah, I think that A Bigger Splash is almost like the more sinister cousin of Call Me by Your Name. It's not really about the one-to-one romance, but it's also in the Italian countryside, and it's got a lot of the similar color palettes. And I think like the film moves at the same clip, but the characters are so different. I think that's kind of what sets the 2 of them apart. But there's a lot of great like fourth wall breaks in the movie. Like their characters will be talking, and then all of a sudden the camera will swivel, and the character will be talking directly into the camera, and I find that super interesting. But I just think it's such a great and entertaining movie. It's almost like, it's kind of like the sensual adult thrillers that used to come out in the 80s and 90s, Body Heat or Tony Scott's Revenge. It's almost like of that ilk. It's not quite as dark, I guess, as those, but I think it's got that same energy. And it's got an incredible dance sequence with Ralph Fiennes. If anybody's not seen it much, he dances to Emotional Rescue, and it's like mesmerizing, and the camera's turning around the room. It's an amazing scene, but it's a really interesting movie. It's a little underseen also, I think, compared to like sort of other movies of that style. It seems like it would appeal to a lot of people, I think.
That's so interesting. Obviously, I want to talk a little bit about his I don't know what to call it, Tilda Swinton connection.
Yeah.
Because there is a major connection there. The fact that he keeps going back to this actress, and obviously Tilda Swinton's an incredible actress, and everyone should work.
Everybody will want to work with her multiple times. Yeah.
Yeah, because she's incredible. But there's still this connection between her and Luca, and I think he's talked about it quite a bit as far as they have this almost like relationship where they're thinking the same thoughts and they're on the same page when it comes artistically. Talk to me about that, Paul.
Well, it's interesting because I think he uses Tilda in a way that other filmmakers don't. A lot of times he uses her as like a sexual being, which it seems like a lot of people reject with her as an actress. I think like her sort of androgynous look makes people think of her as the sort of detached and impersonal character actor. But it's so interesting, especially in I Am Love, that she is this sensual figure that is finding herself in her romances and her sexuality. And I love that the way that, again, Luca uses her so differently in so many different movies. Like in A Bigger Splash, she is this kind of David Bowie-esque rock star who has recently had surgery, so she can't really talk. And I think that is an interesting direction to take her in terms of performance. Like she'll like groan out whispers once in a while, but it's really about her face the entire time. And that's, again, so different from all the different, we'll get into Suspiria later, and obviously like there's a lot going on there in terms of how he uses her as an actress. But I think that he uses her as a tool in so many, and he plays with her image as well. Again, like the way that most people look at Tilda Swinton and think of Tilda Swinton is not the way that Luca Guadagnino thinks of Tilda Swinton. And I think that's evident in the way that he makes her, again, in these different situations that I think are so counter to the way that we generally see her as. You know, like you think of her as this kind of stodgy, mysterious figure that's like, you know, all-knowing, or, you know, like how she's used in Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
Or even something like Michael Clayton, where she's sort of a sinister, straightforward figure. I love that he kind of pulls the sensuality out of her. And it's a little unexpected, but I think it's really satisfying to see that kind of transformation that other filmmakers maybe don't see in her the same way that he does.
Yeah, Sabrina, have you noticed that connection between him and Tilda?
Well, it is really crazy because I know a lot of us think of Tilda Swinton as like a chameleon actress. Everything we see her in, whether it's Snowpiercer, things like that, she can really just take on any role and shine. So yeah, in something like A Bigger Splash, it is really interesting that she is this very like sexual, erotic character, because we don't really get to see that from her a lot. So that was something that I absolutely loved. She held the entire film on her back without even speaking, which is, as you said, which is so insane. She really is like the entire drive of this film, and she's just whispering at some points, and that's basically it. But yeah, A Bigger Splash, I really, really loved it. Of course, it has the backdrop of a Italian island, and it's just so stunning. I was actually watching it, and obviously we're all quarantined right now, but I was like, I would love to be quarantined at that villa. Like, yeah. It is so stunning. And I love how Luca Guadagnino puts you into that world. He puts you into that space for a little bit. And we're meeting all these characters. And as you said, they're dark and they're interesting and they're fascinating, and we want to learn more about them. They're definitely hypersexual, all of them. It's something pretty crazy. And I think this is a very underrated performance from Dakota Johnson. She's very quiet. She's her normal Dakota Johnson, kind of like quiet, timid, but it works so well for this movie. She's a little bit, the thing is with this one, that turned me off the first time I watched it, which was a few years ago. The quotes she says were very reminiscent of like my like Tumblr poetry from when I was like 16.
Oh, okay.
Like, oh, I fall in love with every like pretty little thing. Uh-huh. So that kind of turned me off when I first saw the movie. And then on a rewatch, I think it lends itself very beautifully to her character, kind of. So
yeah, RB3.
Yeah. Well, I'm not as familiar with I Am Love, but just, you know, having watched A Bigger Splash quite a few years ago when it first came on. I think it was on Stars, or one of the premium cable channels. But yeah, I guess the sexuality was really noteworthy to me. Again, another case of style, another style piece that I kind of picked out of it too. Is very similar to Call Me by Your Name. Is the intense focus on intimacy, the details and the business between actors, that they're like the way the actors kind of have like these hand movements and just body movements that kind of are indicative of who they are characters. Like you said Paul, with Ralph Fiennes with the dance scene, there's a lot of moments in Luca's filmography where you can kind of dissect what characters are just through their body language and through stuff like that. And that's also a sign of intense directorial work too. So yeah, just overall, but you know, this one's more of like a thriller than Call Me by Your Name is just straight up more like romantic and all that kind of stuff. But when you look at the build of suspense, like the way the pacing kind of creates this like elongated sense of like anxiety too. That's like kind of slow, but it kind of creeps up. So yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, I feel like that thing you pointed out, Paul, of framing Tilda Swinton in just a different way, because you're right. When I think Doctor Strange, I think Constantine. To be honest, I think that's a memorable performance from her. I think we need to talk about Kevin. Those kind of performances from her, and the way that Luca kind of breaks down that image, and I almost feel like he's really saying something by doing that. And the idea of the way we view desire, the way we view flesh from another human, and framing that with Tilda is perfect. I really do feel like that is a really interesting artistic choice. that he does. Obviously, guys, we need to go to break. After the break, we're going to keep talking about Luca Guadagnino, and make sure you guys stick around.
This ain't funny, so don't you dare laugh. With the 4/5 divide you in half. You getting at me equals a bloodbath. You do the math, take you out the equation.
Check out Andres and Sabrina's review of the new movie, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, available exclusively on First Cut. Enjoy.
There is very little dialogue, as you said. It's a slow burn, definitely, but it's warranted in that way because it's very hard hitting and emotionally rich. There's this kind of like quiet despair throughout this entire journey with Autumn that we feel so deeply. Whether you are a male or a female, I think you can understand the kind of pain and despair that she's feeling with this journey. And the very personal point of view it kind of has in the film that we share with Autumn, it's such a realistic reflection of going through the situation. I think the scene that includes the titular line, we talked about a little bit before we started filming this, and it is my favorite scene of the entire year so far. It's so subtly impactful.
Come along, children. Now we're going to have a little music.
What is up, guys? We're back talking about Luca Guadagnino. Now let's get into his most recent film, which is Suspiria, obviously a remake. This one got a little bit of attention because a lot of people had a lot of thoughts. I feel like overall, this is my thoughts. I don't know what you guys think, that people were kind of split as far as the way they viewed this movie. I want to get your thoughts right away, RB3. What are your thoughts on Suspiria?
Well, yeah, I'm a big fan of the original movie, and it's actually one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It like just it kind of perfectly encapsulates like the brutal, over the top, like kind of slasher kind of style that was happening like in the late 70s from a horror perspective. But it, on a certain level, it's almost like a parody of it in a lot of ways. The way it kind of emphasizes like the overly red blood with this kind of, you know, this overwhelming sense of violence that kind of is like spontaneous, but doesn't like this really art house beautiful kind of way. To me, it's kind of like how The Shining is, you know, kind of satirizes a lot of horror movies in a very Kubrick kind of way. This movie kind of satirizes a lot of other horror movies in a very Italian art house style kind of way. So I was very interested to see how they could remake this, because it is like such a cult classic, and it is like such a great piece of style cinema. I wonder how they're going to adapt it. And ultimately they went, you know, there's usually two ways you could adapt something, right? It's usually like you either do it the exact same, or you know, change everything about it. And either way, you're going to kind of make people mad. This movie kind of shot like kind of perfectly down the middle of changing just enough to where it kind of justifies having a remake, while also maintaining a lot of similarity and enough continuity to make it feel like it's part of his predecessor. So yeah, I kind of genuinely enjoy the new Suspiria movie.
Yeah, because we talked about it beforehand, RB3, and you told us that you are that film, you know, purist kind of guy who's like, don't touch my original, don't touch this perfect movie. So this movie has a lot to deal with when it comes to paying tribute to the original, but also being its own image. Do you think it accomplished that, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually like deviates a lot further than RB3.
Okay.
Like, you know, the original is like sort of the epitome of the giallo Italian, you know, cinema movement of the 70s, where it's like these bright neon colors and this crazy stylized, but overly simplistic story structure, sort of Italian horror movie. And this is just kind of not really that at all. The colors are very simplified, a lot of muted grayer tones, and it almost like totally divert. It really just takes the idea of like an American ballerina goes to a school and there's like, maybe there are witches there. And really it takes that idea and completely, goes in a completely different direction. I think like Luca almost like, he clearly loves the original movie, but didn't really care to remake it. You know, it's remaking the content, not the filmmaking, which I think is the way you have to go. You take the ideas and you change them into something else. Cause I think, you know, you can't do Dario Argento style better than Dario Argento. So I think that would have been a bit of a fool's errand. I think it's really interestingly made. I think that it sort of gets lost in itself a little bit in terms of sort of integrating 70s Central European political turmoil. I don't think that it's super satisfying ultimately in the end of that, but I think that the viscera is so strong. I think there's a specific scene that I'm sure anyone who's seen it will remember that's cross-cutting between Susie's sort of first lead audition and Olga in a different room, who's a different dancer at the academy. And I think that is like, that's emblematic of the parts of the film that are the best. You know, it's like the film, like the use of sound editing of sort of a different visual approach to the original. And I think that where it suffers a little bit is when it gets a little too mired in trying to have a lot of heady ideas. Ultimately, I think it's really, really interesting. And I really like it. Like I've watched it now like 3 or 4 times. But I do think it gets a little lost in itself at times. Yeah,
it's interesting, right? Because this kind of goes back to obviously everything you said, Paul, but at the same time, I find it fascinating that this does deal with witches and it does deal with women. And we see the Tilda Swinton, Dakota Johnson kind of comeback. Sabrina, I don't know what you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I actually really, really like this one. And I went into it a little skeptical just because, of course, you're remaking a classic. But I think the changes he made from the original kind of keep it fresh. I would have hated to see a shot-for-shot remake, similar color palette. It would have really, really bothered me. So I like the changes that he made because the original, I feel like on a rewatch, I do really love it. But it does have a lot of like, tropes. It's a sign of the times of when it came out. But this one with Dakota Johnson's wrap up with her ending as a character, I really, really enjoyed that. And even the scene, as Paul said, the second I saw that scene, that's when I knew I was going to like it, because I've talked about it a little bit before, but I'm a huge fan of like body horror, things like that. That is the most gruesome thing I've seen in a long time. So I really like those kind of risks Guadagnino takes, like taking this entire thing on. I can't imagine kind of choosing between where to go on this, because we don't want a shot-for-shot remake like a Psycho situation, like a Vince Vaughn Psycho. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I've rewatched it a few times since. I think after time, people might warm up to it a little bit. I think it just had a lot of backlash in the beginning. I saw people on Twitter saying that we didn't need it, which I understand. I'm also one of those people where I don't think everything has to be remade or rebooted. We can leave it as is. But I think this is a beautiful tribute, like honor to the original. It accompanies it very well.
Yeah, I feel like I opened Pandora's box by talking about the whole should it be remade conversation that a lot of people have. I mean, obviously, people know my thoughts on the vast majority of remakes and reboots, is that generations don't really know about these movies until they watch the remake and then go back and watch the original. I still feel like that is the truth for a lot of kids who watch movies and think it's the first time they're watching it and then look it up and they're like, oh, there was an original. And then they go back and watch it. That's what I've done personally with a lot of movies. So I'm speaking for myself in that sense, but it's always a tricky challenge because you want to satisfy fans of the original, but at the same time, you want to make it unique and make it worth the investment that the studio put ahead of time when it comes to budget, right? So I think that's fascinating ahead of time. But I kind of want to jump real quick with Luca's fascination with dance. I think it's something that should be brought up. I mean, there's a few dance scenes in quite a few of his movies. So do you feel like there's something there? Obviously, you could tell he's a fan of it. But the fact that he did the entire Suspiria premise around this is really fascinating. And I like that you said body horror, Sabrina, because that's probably the one that I hate the most. Because I hate just like the idea of just destroying your body, which is obviously all about this movie.
We've established that I'm a masochist, so I like the stuff that scares me, the stuff that hurts me the most. Because that romances. Really is, all of that kind of stuff, I'm all here for it, because body horror freaks me out. The idea of like breaking a bone or that entire scene shook me to my core, and that's why I loved it.
Yeah, and when I think about it, I feel like running away, like right now, because that is awful. Yeah, Suspiria, man. Obviously, overall, I feel like people have mixed feelings on it.
Oh, go ahead, RB3.
Oh no,
well, I was gonna say, I think especially when you look and compare the original and the modern version. Going back to Paul's point of like the differentiality, I think what really distinguishes the kind of what this movie is going for and what the 1977 version was going for. This version is very like pro, like feminist, very female centric.
That's kind of what I was trying to say, but you're saying it.
yeah. I know you're getting to that, but I just wanted to cut you off and say that.
No.
Before you, so I could look like I was a little smarter. Yeah. But you know, as compared to like the 1977 version, it is, you know, a lot of people criticized it. A lot of female film writers have criticized it for being like misogynistic and having this like perspective of like the evil women and all this kind of stuff. Whereas in comparison to Luca's version, it's a lot more the disdain for femininity and the kind of competitive nature is prevalent, but is shown more as like an institutional consequence of what's going on in the country and politically, like during that time. Having it set in like 1977 Berlin and very Cold War era kind of climate, it kind of emphasizes that like kind of cold, isolated mentality that there was towards women, especially the main character who was an American dancer. So it's crazy. It's just all around. It deals with a lot of different themes. The first original movie was kind of light on commentary. It was more of a stylistic horror piece that, you know, that is fun and enjoyable and highly colorful. But this one kind of goes out of its way to make it a lot more deeper and a lot more philosophical.
I think that was my biggest takeaway too, was the idea of the focusing on the women aspect of it and setting it in that time period was very purposeful by Luca. But before we move on, I mean, before we kind of close the episode, I really want to talk about what you brought up, Paul, and especially with this movie, right? Well, not especially, but he does quite a bit, as Sabrina pointed out, with body horror. But Luca's focus on kind of targeting the audience's senses, whether it be to terrify or whether it be to fascinate. And I know RB3 brought it up too with Call Me By Your Name. You said there was a award for this, right? Paul?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, wait, which specific thing do you, I mean, I guess like,
you said it was the sensiology or something, sensology. Like you said, his focus on the senses.
Oh, like the I guess like he's a sensualist.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think that also it's like a lot about just physicality in general, like the human body in all kind of different facets. Fascinates him, and I think the movement of the human body. Even Call Me By Your Name, you know, you have the multiple scenes of them dancing. You know, obviously the famous Army Hammer, like sort of dancing in the club scene. But I think that again, it's a lot about how composing movement sort of reflects the change in our characters. But again, the Suspiria thing it's pretty interesting because I think in a lot of ways, like it does have like at points to deeper themes, but it doesn't necessarily explore them in a way that's totally satisfying. I think like it has ideas about women in power, but really all that translates to is just powerful women as opposed to like making a real statement on that. But I think, again, the strongest parts are the physical manifestations of that. You know, the performance of Volk at the end when they have all the red tape across them, like, is so mesmerizing. And so entrancing that I think that is like sort of the strongest part of the filmmaking in a lot of his movies is taking the human body and sort of twisting it and changing it. I mean, in this case, literally twisting it. But that's, I think, one of the sort of the stronger hallmarks of the film is the way he takes the human body and sort of bends it to his will.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going for. I apologize ahead of time. But either way, Sabrina, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I was just saying, because you mentioned just like senses in general. And I think something I really take away from a lot of his stuff is just, we mentioned it before, the sound design, score.
Sound design.
And it stands out to me the most for Call Me By Your Name and also for Suspiria, which is something we didn't mention when we were talking about Suspiria, but Tom York.
Oh yeah.
That score, I was listening to it on repeat before I saw the movie. It is so haunting. It is perfect for the film. It really is one of those like auditory senses things that like gets you, like it gives you the shivers. And that's what I'm here for with something like this. So a score like that really elevates something like Suspiria. I mean, without it,
Yeah, I feel like that's something he really wants audiences to feel. It's the idea of like everyone has a body, so we can all kind of relate to what he's portraying on the screen. But the way he visualizes that is a very specific way, which makes him a great director. So absolutely, that's a big thing. Before we move on, guys, what's next? Obviously, I'm looking at his IMDb right now. It looks like he has a documentary about a shoemaker. He has a mini series that he's doing on TV, and then he has a movie called Blood on the Tracks that's coming out. And it says it's based on Bob Dylan's 1975 album,
Concept
Blood on
album,
the Tracks.
Yeah.
So, are we excited for this?
Yeah, there's been reports that he's in talks to acquire the sort of famous unfinished Kubrick project, the Aryan Papers. And I think that there's talk of him adapting that or translating that in some way. And I think if that happens, that is sort of the thing that I'm most interested in. But I'd love to see what he does with his next move, just because he sort of Suspiria is such a zag. You know, like you see I Am Love, Bigger Splash, and Call Me by Your Name, and you think you understand his ethic, and then he sort of takes a turn into something else. And I think I'd love to see if that continues, if he goes on a totally different path from there. I do think, again, we'll continue to see sort of this physicality, and it's almost, I'd like to say his films are like a negotiation of space. So it's like these characters that are pushing and pulling within the space that they're in and try to expand their space. And I think that that's something that you could see continue in his other work, depending on what it is, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, if I'm being honest, I think this Bob Dylan concept album sounds kind of cool. I don't know what you think, RB3.
Yeah, that sounds super, super interesting. I mean, that's some, again, we don't go back to, Luca's style and like his, I think that kind of aligns very nicely with like Bob Dylan's kind of like simple, kind of minimalist kind of way of making music, that aligning with this sort of with his sort of style and his sort of eye for subtlety and realism. I think that could really work out and be something really special.
Sabrina?
Yeah, Blood on the Tracks is actually one of my favorite albums. I listen to it constantly. It's really, really great. So that's really cool. I'm looking forward to that. But also, I know a lot of people have been talking about this since the movie came out, but a sequel to Call Me by Your Name.
That's right. He said he would do it, right? He said
they're in pre-production.
Yeah.
Oh, no way.
And I don't know how much it's going to be based off the book, because there is a sequel book that came out last October. And I finished reading it a few months ago. And I enjoyed it, but I don't know how much they're actually going to take from that in particular, or if they're going to just like continue on, because it does have a large time jump. So I don't know how they would deal with all that kind of stuff. But I mean, I would look forward to a sequel with all the original cast and everything of this story, for sure.
Yeah, I saw an interview with Luca beforehand, and I heard him mention that he's doing the sequel, or that he was down for the sequel.
Yeah.
It might have been an older interview. But at the same time, I heard him mention something about the projection of the two characters and the idea of him kind of tackling the age gap. And I know that's something we never brought up in our conversation, but
True.
I personally remember when I was in my production studio, our office had a conversation around it. And apparently there was kind of this weird quasi debate of people kind of being like, I like this movie, but it's kind of weird that they have this enormous age gap. And I should have brought it up during our Call Me by Your Name conversation, but I'll bring it up now because I feel like it's a worthy conversation. Did you notice that, Sabrina, and did that bother you at all? Or did you feel like, nah, it's fine?
I was personally able to look past it. I do understand if people have some kind of qualm against it. I understand. Also, the thing is, Timothée Chalamet, when he was first starting out, he looks so much younger.
He looks like he's 10.
That's the thing that I know Elio's 17, so he's very young, and Timothy was the right age. But if you look at when, like, obviously him in the film versus him doing like press and him at the Oscars that year, he grew a lot. Like, he changed a lot physically. So I get that, because Timothée Chalamet does look very young. I personally am not bothered by it.
Okay.
I still enjoy it. I can look past it, but I understand.
Yeah.
I think.
Any thoughts?
Also, I mean, it takes place in Italy, so it's like, I think holding a different country to our standards is a little strange. But also, like, I think Elio has such like an intelligence and emotional maturity that you can kind of see in the film. I guess maybe not as much emotional, but he's clearly like very much like intelligent and has the mind of an adult. You know, he's talking about very complicated ideas and works. And I think like that to me helps sort of mitigate any issue. Like, you know, if he was talking about high school drama, then that would be different. But he's talking about, you know, like German novels from like the 1700s. So it's a little different, I think, when you look at them as those figures. You know, there is something to it. I think that you know, I understand the conversation around it, but I think that for me, like it's not something that I ever really felt. It never to me felt weird or wrong that these two people would be together and in love. But yeah, that's just how I feel.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I agree
go ahead, Sabrina.
Well, just because Elio is a character, like as you said, he's very cultured, he's very intelligent. So yeah, that's definitely.
Yeah, and plus the age of consent in Italy is 14, so they were technically within range. I mean, cultural differences, y'all. Cultural differences. I ain't gonna judge. I'm American. We do a lot of bad stuff in America. So.
Our RB3 is like pulling out. Well, it looks like hey,
He hasn't all read the list.
Yeah, I know exactly where I can.
Neil deGrasse Tyson meme. Yeah, well, the reason why I brought it up was because Luca brought it up in an interview, and I thought that was the most interesting because it's like the reporter didn't even bring that up, but he was the first one to be like,
he knew the conversation was happening, so you kind of might as well meet it head on.
Yeah, and it was interesting because that debate was happening at my production company, you know, so it's not like it's happening within the Hollywood industry, technically. So it's not like a conversation happening with audiences. I personally don't know what maybe audiences felt that as well. So
Twitter felt that.
Twitter? Okay.
Twitter felt that. They still do. I see it like once a week.
Yeah, but either way, obviously Luca has done some really interesting movies, fascinating movies, beautiful movies. And it's a director that we're looking forward to anything that he has coming out. Before we take off, guys, I want to do a quick favorite. I'm assuming everyone's favorite is Call Me By Your Name by assumption, but do you guys have a favorite scene, a favorite moment from that movie or maybe from another movie? I'll go to you, RB3, because you look ready.
Yeah, I mean, I have said it before, but like the long take when they are in the when they're in the little plaza area and doing like the 360 shot around the fountain as they're having that conversation, just the way the camera racks focus and this like unbroken take that, you know, it doesn't call attention to itself being like a oneer, but it has that. So it's really amazing to me.
Sabrina?
Definitely Michael Stuhlbarg's monologue at the end. It's something that I have a deep connection with. It's something that I love so much and I revisit a lot. And also another one is, of course, the Mystery of Love scene where they're kind of running while they're on vacation, like through like the hills and the mountains and stuff. It's really beautiful. And then I have one more, but I want to let Paul go just in case. I don't want to steal it.
Okay, Paul.
So yeah, I guess for me, not to cheat again, there's kind of two-ish. One of them is I sort of mentioned before is the dance scene when they first go to that outdoor club. Mm-hmm. I love sort of the freewheeling motion and the way that they're expressing themselves, but also like to me the monologue is amazing, but I think it doesn't hit as hard without the very end of the movie, where you see like as he stares into the fire, it's almost him absorbing everything his dad has said and reckoning with everything that him and Oliver's relationship with each other has meant to him. And I think that's like, you know, that is like sort of the punch at the end of the movie. You know, I obviously love all the other moments that they mentioned, but I think that one is one that really stands out to me as well.
Sabrina. Oh, you did it.
I knew it. I knew somebody else was going to have it. And I was like, I don't want to see it. Yeah. That is
the whole movie.
I'm like, you know what? Just watch the entire thing. But no, definitely even hearing about how Timothée Chalamet, he had like a headphone in and he was listening to Visions of Gideon at the time. And that's something that really, because that song is just so beautiful. And it is such a great wrap up because it is a little bit of a different ending from the book. And I love that. I love that they changed that ending just a tad, like not too much, but yeah, it's great.
Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Obviously, we want to have you back on, man, because you have a lot of knowledge from a lot of directors.
Thank you.
And we're a director's podcast, or at least we try to be. So thank you so much, man, for taking time away from your quarantine.
Yeah, former Schmodown champion. Let's not forget that. Let's go. Future Schmodown champion.
There you go.
We'll see whenever it comes back.
We'll be ready for you.
Thanks you guys for having me. I'd love to come back. You know, again, many different directors that I would love to talk about at any point. You know, just let me know, and I'd love to come back.
Absolutely, man. I'm being honest when I say we want to have you back on, and we will have you back on very soon.
Yeah.
So
and you were a
so
listener
much.
way back in the day too, way back.
Yeah, after the first few episodes, I remember that.
Thank you.
How did you get through that? Now I'm playing.
I just would skip the Ace parts and listen to RB. No.
I will too. Thank you so much, man. Honestly, we appreciate it, man.
For sure.
And obviously, the time zone difference might be crazy for you, and I made sure RB3 let you go by text that if that was okay, because we move around for you.
No.
So,
no worries at all. I mean, if I wasn't doing this, I'd be probably watching movies, so it's not too.
Yeah. Taking time away from your movie watching, man. That's what we do. All right, guys, for the Meaning of podcast, let's go around the table. I'm Andres.
This is RB3.
Sabrina?
And
Yeah, I'm
we're peacing out, guys. Peace out.